When James Bond conquered the world, Hollywood and Europe rushed to fill the screen with copies, imitations, and parodies. Some were brilliant, others were disasters, most were forgotten. The myth of 007 was so powerful that escaping his shadow seemed impossible, and that is precisely why dozens of films tried to steal his throne. 13 of those imitations are worth revisiting. A few were genuine surprises, others vanished without a trace, and a handful achieved something that seemed out of reach. They became cult classics in their own right. The Eurospy phenomenon was born in Italy, where actor Ken Clark became the face of the so-called Italian Bond. In Agent 077, Mission. Bloody Mary, the plot follows a special agent tasked with recovering stolen nuclear warheads before they fall into the wrong hands. The film has everything you would expect from a Bond imitation. International intrigue, flashy gadgets, mysterious women, a villain threatening the world. What makes it more curious is how it was marketed, as a more realistic, more serious alternative to the original Bond. A risky move considering the budget was a fraction of the British productions, and many of the gadgets looked more like toys than cutting-edge technology. Despite those limitations, the film earned enough to spawn sequels, and Ken Clark became a recurring face in the genre. Over time, Mission Bloody Mary turned into the textbook example of how Europe embraced spy fever to compete with the glamour of 007. Italy wanted its hero. France was not about to be left behind. France already had its own literary spy before Bond dominated the screen. The enigmatic OSS 117. Jean Bruce's novels gave rise to a film saga that began in 1963 with OSS 117 Unleashed. What set this agent apart from other imitators was his popularity. For several years, OSS 117 was even more popular than James Bond in France. His films blended exotic locations, international intrigue, and an almost aristocratic elegance. While Sean Connery played a tougher Bond, OSS 117 leaned into sophistication and seduction. The character kept appearing in multiple installments throughout the decade. Decades later, in 2006, the agent returned as a parody with Jean Dujardin starring in OSS 117, Cairo, Nest of Spies. That ironic reinvention brought him back to the spotlight, proving that his figure still lived in the collective memory. While France was thriving with its spy, Germany and Italy joined forces to create another extravagant clone. The next imitator came from an unusual co-production between Germany and Italy. Kommissar X premiered in 1965 and quickly turned into a saga spanning 6 films. The lead, played by Tony Kendall, was a mix of private detective and international super spy. Flashy suits, femmes fatales, adventures drenched in color. Kommissar X felt more like a Bond caricature than a serious contender. The stories were simple, the villains generic, the gadgets sometimes bordering on absurd. But the playful tone and the exotic locations managed to hook an audience looking for quick entertainment. The saga held on for several years, something few imitations achieved, which shows that, exaggerated as it was, it connected with viewers. Not every clone went for colorful parody, though. Some aimed for a more serious style, even if the result was equally strange. In 1966, one of the most remembered Eurospy films appeared, Secret Agent Super Dragon. The title said it all, an impossible spy armed with even more impossible gadgets. The protagonist was a retired agent pulled back into action to investigate an international conspiracy. What made the film stand out was its pop aesthetic. Psychedelic colors, exaggerated sets, futuristic technology that looked straight out of a comic book. Today, it may look kitsch. At the time, it represented the genre pushed to its absolute limit. It was so extravagant that years later it became a cult object on the American show Mystery Science Theater 3000, famous for rescuing bizarre films. If this agent seemed over the top, the next one sought to set itself apart with a much grittier tone. Starring George Artisan, Agent 3S3, Passport to Hell tried to distance itself from the glamour of 007 with a darker approach. There was no elegant hero in luxury casinos here. Instead, the audience got an agent exposed to street-level violence, rougher chases, and far less polished situations. The tone was surprisingly harsh for a Bond clone, which led some critics to consider it a genuine alternative to the gadget-heavy British formula. It never reached the fame of other titles, but it showed that not every imitator wanted to be a shameless copy. Some tried to offer a different face, even if the audience in this case preferred to stick with the familiar 007 formula. While clones multiplied across Europe, the United States decided that the best way to compete with Bond was to recruit one of its biggest stars. The legendary Dean Martin starred in The Silencers, bringing to life Agent Matt Helm. It was America's answer to the Bond phenomenon, a blend of espionage, humor, beautiful women, and a laid-back attitude that mirrored Martin's own persona. This saga was not a straight parody, it was a lighter, funnier take on the genre. Martin played Helm as a slightly clumsy but always charming agent, surrounded by women and gadgets as absurd as they were entertaining. The film did well enough to generate several sequels. It never matched the prestige of James Bond, but Matt Helm became an icon of the era, proving that even the biggest stars in music and film wanted a piece of the spy wave. Dean Martin brought the humor. James Coburn took the satire to another level entirely, with a character many consider even cooler than Bond. James Coburn became Derek Flint in Our Man Flint, one of the most famous and respected imitations of the Eurospy era. Unlike other clones, Flint was not a second-rate Bond. He was a character designed to parody the excesses of 007. He spoke multiple languages, mastered martial arts, worked as a scientist, and was practically a Superman. The plot revolved around an organization called Galaxy that was attempting to control the world's weather. A delirious premise, but a perfect fit for an exaggerated hero. Audiences loved the mix of action and humor. Several critics went as far as saying that Coburn was even cooler than Sean Connery. Flint was the ultimate spy, a kind of ironic response to the British myth. The success was so massive that barely a year later, a sequel arrived, even more unhinged than the original. Based on a famous Italian comic, Danger Diabolik told the story of a masked thief who defied the authorities with spectacular heists. He was not a spy in the classic sense, but his visual style, his futuristic settings, and the presence of impossible gadgets placed him squarely in Bond's universe. Dino De Laurentiis produced the film with a considerable budget, which allowed for a psychedelic aesthetic that became a hallmark of the era. Diabolik was more anti-hero than hero, but the influence of James Bond was visible in every detail, from the car chases to the secret lairs. Over time, the film became a cult work, celebrated for its stylistic excess and its rebellious tone. If Diabolik was sophisticated, the next Italian attempt was far more brazen. The title alone made the intention clear. Interpol 009 was an Italian production that tried to compete in the international market by presenting a spy nearly identical to 007, but with far less budget and originality. The film was criticized for its shameless copying, with a predictable plot and characters that seemed lifted directly from the British films. Agent 009 failed to convince audiences, who dismissed it as a second-rate version. Its existence, though, illustrates just how far the Bond effect reached across Europe, producing imitators who could not even hide the obvious. While Europe kept copying, the English-speaking world decided to mock itself. This was not a cheap clone. It was an official parody of Ian Fleming's work. Casino Royale, released in 1967, was a chaotic project. 5 directors, multiple script rewrites, and a stellar cast led by David Niven, Peter Sellers, Woody Allen, and Ursula Andress. The film was an absolute mess. A mix of absurd scenes, screwball comedy, and a plot that was nearly impossible to follow. And yet, that madness turned it into an unforgettable oddity. Many viewers were bewildered at the time. Over the years, Casino Royale earned its place as a psychedelic gem, a testament to how far Bond fever had reached into popular culture. The parodies did not stop there. Years later, new versions would ridicule the British spy with masterful precision. Mike Myers revolutionized 90s comedy with Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, a shameless parody of the entire Bond saga, from the megalomaniac villains to the women with impossible names. Austin Powers was a ridiculous spy, frozen in time and completely out of place in the modern world. With his terrible teeth, psychedelic outfits, and infinite clumsiness, he became a cultural icon who did more than make people laugh. He revitalized the spy comedy genre. The success was enormous and spawned sequels that reinforced his status as the greatest parodic tribute to 007. If Austin Powers represented absurd humor, another British figure took the joke into more familiar territory. Rowan Atkinson, famous for playing Mr. Bean, became the bumbling spy Johnny English. The film was a direct send-up of Bond's seriousness, featuring an incompetent agent who, through sheer luck or clumsiness, always managed to complete his missions. With physical humor, simple gags, and absurd situations, it won over family audiences and became a worldwide hit. Its popularity was so large that it spawned several sequels and established Johnny English as one of the most endearing Bond imitators. These 13 films prove that the shadow of James Bond stretches far enough to have inspired imitations, parodies, and serious competitors for decades. No other spy in film history has generated so many clones. That alone says everything about the scale of the myth. Some of these films tried to replicate the formula step by step and failed. Others dared to reinvent the genre with a darker, more exaggerated, or even comedic style. Over time, several of them gained new value. What once looked like B-movie fare now reads as a fascinating window into an era when everyone wanted their own 007. The Bond phenomenon did not just dominate the box office, it reshaped popular culture. Without Bond, there would probably be no Flint, no Matt Helm, no Austin Powers, no Johnny English. That is the clearest proof that, while the original still reigns, his imitators left their mark too. Some of those copies ended up achieving what seemed impossible, becoming cult classics, cherished by fans who seek out oddities, kitsch cinema, or simply a glimpse into the spy fever of the 60s and 70s.